In 2009, Teena Marie said these chilling words. For a while, I thought I was cursed. I was in a lot of pain, and it's really amazing to me that even through that pain, I could write some really joyful music. But why did Teena feel this way? Well, because in the final year of her life, she'd encountered several freak accidents that were unexplained, and then not too long after, she was gone. The reports surrounding her death were never clear and left doctors wondering what really happened. They could never really find anything that was definitive, so they labeled her passing as natural causes. But was it? There had to be a reason that Teena thought she was cursed in her final years, and with those unexplainable encounters as well as her disturbing last tweets before her transition, she obviously felt something wasn't right. And we'll discuss them here. But before we can look at her end, we need to look at her beginning and see the life that was the Ivory Queen of Soul, Teena Marie. As I always do, I'd like to give a disclaimer. I don't know what is or isn't true. Take everything I say here with a grain of salt. I got my information from books, interviews, blogs, and people who supposedly knew her. So in other words, these are not my words, but I put it in a cohesive story for you. Teena Marie, the Ivory Queen of Soul, was a force of nature, a white woman with a voice that resonated deeply within the heart of Black music. Her journey was one of triumph, tragedy, and an unyielding connection to the soulful rhythms that defined her life. But in the last 5 years of her career and life, she faced a tidal wave of adversity that tested her spirit like never before. Mary Christine Brockert, known to the world as Teena Marie, was born on March 5, 1956 in Santa Monica, California. The daughter of construction worker Thomas Leslie Brockert and home renovator Mary Ann, she grew up in Venice, California. This was a neighborhood filled with the rhythms of Black culture, which shaped her musical identity. Unlike most white kids in her area, Teena was drawn to the soulful sounds of Motown, jazz, and funk. She had a deep affinity for artists such as Sarah Vaughan and Smokey Robinson. She also hung out extensively in the neighboring hood of Oakwood, where she also would partake in Black culture. She was often chased home by white kids who called her an N-word lover because of her deep connection to Black culture. But that didn't stop her. She would later say she considered herself a Black white girl at heart, and the people around the way treated her as such. She was always invited to the proverbial cookout. Her talents emerged early. As a child, she landed a small role on the Beverly Hillbillies, playing a young girl at a birthday party. And at the age of 10, she performed at legendary comedian Jerry Lewis's wedding. But as much as she enjoyed acting, music was her true passion. A self-taught musician, Teena learned to play piano, guitar, and drums, developing a deep appreciation for composition and instrumentation. While in high school, she fronted several bands, determined to make a name for herself in the industry. But that wasn't the only reason Teena wanted to join the music business. For her, pursuits to the music industry at that time was being used as an alibi to cover up some of her dirty deeds. According to these men, as well as a few blog commenters who claimed to know her, Teena really was about the Black culture completely, and unfortunately, even the bad parts. According to these men, while Teena was still in high school, she joined their gang. Teena was a part of the Shoreline Crips of Venice. According to the blog commenters, Teena, who the gang used to lovingly call Casper the Friendly Ghost and Vanilla Child, was a dope girl. After school, she'd get the substances for the gang and transport it back to them. Supposedly, she was deep in the gang life, but had to stop to focus on music because the drug game was getting too big, and she needed an out when it got too heavy and people were getting arrested. So Teena put all of her energy into her music, performing for anyone who would listen and trying to get signed to a deal. Also following graduation, Teena juggled auditioning for various record companies while studying English literature at Santa Monica College. In 1976, when she was only 20 years old, Teena's big break came when she and her group auditioned for a movie that Motown was developing. The movie was about orphans, but unfortunately, the project was shelved. However, Berry Gordy loved her voice. He saw no use for her group and only wanted her. Her friends were left behind. But even though she had undeniable talent, Gordy didn't know what to do with her. Motown was a Black label with a Black audience. Where would a white girl fit? Plus, Barry had already tried signing white artists before. When he was first launching Motown, then known as Hitsville, he'd signed white artists such as Debbie Dean, Chris Clark, and Rare Earth, to name a few. But none of them were successful, so he kept his focus on the more popular black artists on his roster. But it was something about Teena that Barry really liked, and he quickly signed her to what would be one of the worst record contracts ever. According to the book Hitmen by Frederick Denon, Barry Gordy and his team set the young Teena up for a terrible contract, one that she'd have to fight for several years. In 1976, the day Teena signed with Motown, she had no attorney at all. When she asked to take her contract home before signing it, she later testified that a Motown official admonished her saying, "What's wrong with you? Don't you trust us?" She had no choices in any of the decisions either. Motown gave her whatever they wanted. For example, she didn't get to hire and choose her own manager. Motown assigned the common-law wife of Berry Gordy's brother as her manager. To add insult to injury, the label paid her about $100 a week for what would turn into 6.5 years. But she was young and vanilla, literally. She had no clue about the business, and Berry Gordy, of course, was banking on that. Either way, she was signed and now officially a part of the Motown family, and Berry still didn't know what to do with her. For several years, he tried several writers and producers on her, and they couldn't find what would work for her as a white artist at a black label. But she stuck around and would write and compose music while watching the other artists working at the label. One day, while Teena was playing the piano and singing in the rehearsal room, she looked up and saw one of the funkiest men she'd ever seen, and that man was Rick James. Rick was blown away by this white girl who had great singing chops and could play multiple instruments. At the time, he was supposed to be producing songs for an album for Diana Ross, but Rick wanted to produce Diana's whole album, and since Barry didn't allow him to do that, he dropped her project to work with the young, unknown white girl who had captivated him. The two connected instantly, and it was through Rick James that Teena was able to truly find her sound, funk. The result would be her debut album, Wild and Peaceful, in 1979, entirely produced by Rick James. To ease Teena out to the public, the label chose not to put her face on the album cover and instead wanted to see if they had a hit on their hands. They did. Her first hit, I'm a Sucker for Your Love, reached number 8 on the US Black Singles Chart and number 43 in the UK. And was followed by a cover version of Don't Look Back, originally recorded by The Temptations. Her album, Wild and Peaceful, peaked at number 18 on the Black Albums chart and number 94 on the Billboard Albums chart. Her newly found success, as well as her attachment to Rick James, left many believing Teena was black until they saw her. She debuted on an episode of Soul Train performing the song, and although they were shocked, just like back home in Venice and Oakwood, the black community welcomed her with open arms. Teena was the first white artist on Soul Train and had been on a total of 8 times, more than any other artist. Teena's life and career had taken off like a jet, and right at the tip of it was her tumultuous relationship with Rick. Teena and Rick's relationship was a mix of passion, brilliance, and toxicity. She fell hard for him, but she was unaware of just how much of a womanizer he was. Despite his affairs, she believed she was the one. Their love or lust was intense, so much so that Teena wrote songs about it, or at least that's how Rick James saw it. While she was on tour with him in 1981, the performers made a stop at the Stanley in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. It's there where the two consummated their relationship. In Rick James's book, he loved to brag about how passionate their lovemaking was, how they made love from sun up to sundown, and how Teena told him that he was the first and only man who made her have an O. It was because of this passionate night that Teena wrote the song Portuguese Love. Rick joked that Pittsburgh Love wouldn't sound right, but according to Teena, that song wasn't about him at all. Portuguese Love was about a Cape Verdean man that she was also seeing at the time. So, as upset as she was at Rick for having multiple women, it seems Miss Teena had her side dudes as well. But Rick James did, however, inspire a few songs, one notably being Casanova Brown. As much as they loved each other, their relationship was doomed. Rick's substance abuse addiction and infidelity shattered her. The heartbreak led her to write Casanova Brown, a song about their tumultuous relationship. But as much as Rick put her through, she stuck by him. She later revealed that he even made her take care of children he didn't know he had, putting enormous emotional strain on her. Because Rick was so wrapped up in his rock star lifestyle of partying, multiple relations, and heavy substances, he fathered several children that he wasn't aware of. Once he found out that he had a son and a daughter, he blatantly told Teena, "I can't take both of them. I'll take the girl. You take the boy." And just like that, Teena became a mother to Rick Jr. and had him since he was 8 years old. She seemed too eager and willing to help, but that showed how kind-hearted she was. She took in several children over the years. She became the godmother of Minnie Riperton's daughter, Maya Rudolph, and Marvin Gaye's daughter, Nona Gaye. According to Rick, Teena also liked the ladies as much as he did, or at least she seemed confused about it. He said that Teena questioned her sexuality and wondered if she was a full lesbian or bisexual. She even wrote songs that hinted at her curiosity and perhaps experiences. Her songs Honey Call and Ivory hint at these possibilities. Eventually, she cut sexual ties with Rick, though their bond remained undeniable and she continued to focus on her career. In 1980, Teena released 2 more albums, Lady T and Irons in the Fire, for which she handled most of the writing and production herself, an achievement considered rare at the time for a female artist. The single I Need Your Lovin' brought Teena Marie her first top 40 hit. It also peaked at number 28 in the UK chart. That same year, Teena appeared on Rick James's album Street Songs with their duet Fire and Desire, a song that's still considered a legendary track. And it's noted that Teena recorded that song with a high fever, but she managed to record her vocals in one take before having to be rushed to the hospital. Teena Marie's tenure with Motown continued her success in 1981 with the release of It Must Be Magic, her first gold record, which included her then biggest hit on R&B, Square Biz and Portuguese Love. Because she was one of the first artists rapping in Square Biz, Teena was regarded as somewhat of a pioneer in helping to bring hip-hop to the mainstream. That was an impressive feat. Teena was ultimately thriving and doing well for the most part, even with her janky contract with Motown. But after a while, the jankiness came to a boil. Not only was she not being paid much of anything with the $100 a week, by this time she'd made Motown $2 million and she wasn't seeing any of the royalties from her work. On top of that, she and the studio heads were bumping heads about the direction of her music. She wanted to release certain things. They said no and stopped her. She expressed how unsatisfied she was there, and they expressed how they didn't care. Not only wouldn't they release new material on her, they refused for her to go to another label. They just decided to keep her shelved and do nothing with her. Motown was infamous for doing cruel things like this to their artists. Some, to name a few, were Florence Ballard from the Supremes and Paul Williams from the Temptations. These 2 particular cases were devastating because these are the reasons some believe Florence died from heartbreak, and Paul Williams died from self-deletion, allegedly. Berry Gordy, for some cruel reason, loved holding his artists in career hostage, but Teena fought back. In 1982, Teena Marie got into a very heated legal battle with Motown over her contract and disagreements about releasing her new material. This lawsuit ultimately resulted in what would be the Brockert Initiative, which made it illegal for a record company to keep an artist under contract without releasing new material for that artist. In these instances, artists are allowed to then sign and release with another label instead of being held back by the unsupportive one. Teena acknowledged that her fight and her law helped a lot of artists in the industry, including Luther Vandross and the Mary Jane Girls, to name a few. She said in a Los Angeles Times article, It wasn't something I set out to do. I just wanted to get away from Motown and have a good life. But it helped a lot of people like Luther Vandross and the Mary Jane Girls and a lot of different artists to be able to get out of their contracts. Ironically, even though this is a law, it seems there are still record companies who still abuse artists in this way. For example, one of the most famous cases of this record company abuse is Warner's Brothers and Prince. In the 90s, Warner's Brothers refused to release Prince albums unless he sold a significant amount on previous releases. As prolific as Prince was, he wanted to constantly push out work and release on his own terms. He was under what he called a slave contract, and the company literally owned him, including his name. But he found a loophole. He finished off his contract with Warner Brothers as Prince, but changed his name to a symbol and was able to continue working as a successful musician without them. But as much as he made such a rally cry on behalf of artists getting their ownership of their own music and image, he was a hypocrite because he broke the law as well. Prince held his artist and protege Jill Jones in a hostage contract for 10 years, stopping her from breaking her contract with him or releasing any music with anyone else. She couldn't even use her name. She worked as a background singer for the band Chic before leaving the music industry altogether. Crazy enough, both of them, Warner's Brothers and Prince, were conducting illegal practices because of Teena Marie's law, and they weren't the only ones to do this. Blackground Records, a record company owned by the late Aaliyah's uncle, Barry Hankerson, held several of his artists hostage and refused to release their work or sign with another company. The most well-known of them was with singer JoJo. JoJo signed a 7-album contract with Blackground when she was just 12 years old. During that time, she released 2 successful albums, JoJo in 2004 and The High Road in 2006. After that, for multiple predatory reasons, Blackground repeatedly failed to release any more of her music. They did several things to hinder her moving forward, like withholding the release of her music until she loses weight or neglecting to pay producers and vendors she worked with. In 2013, she filed a lawsuit against Blackground Records for irreparable damages to her professional career. She won the suit and was able to leave Blackground and sign a new deal with Atlantic Records. Her career was completely stalled because Barry refused to release new music for her. Her career still hasn't really recovered since. So unfortunately, even though Teena's law has been helpful, it hasn't stopped these horrible record companies from screwing artists over. But still, it was a victory for Teena, and she left Motown as the label's most successful white solo act and signed with Epic Records. In the fall of 1982, Teena Marie signed a worldwide deal with Epic that also allowed her to establish her own publishing company called Midnight Magnet. It was there where she released her concept album called Robbery, which featured the song Casanova Brown. Then, in 1984, Teena released the biggest selling album of her career called Star Child. It had her biggest hit ever, Lover Girl, which peaked at number 4 on the U.S. Billboard Hot 100 chart in March 1985. In 1986, Teena Marie released a rock music-influenced concept album titled Emerald City that was supposedly heavily influenced by Prince's Purple Rain. And she had songs on soundtracks for major movies like The Goonies and the hit film Top Gun. Around this time, her fans were confused by her sound and image. They were so used to the funky, groovy R&B white girl that they didn't know what to think of her new sounds. So her albums weren't selling like before. But in 1988, smartly, she returned to her R&B and funk origins when she released the critically acclaimed album Naked to the World, and it paid off. This album contained the hit Ooh La La La, which reached number 1 on the Billboard's Hot R&B and Hip Hop Singles and Tracks chart. In the fall of 1990, Teena Marie released her album Ivory, but it scored no pop hits but had 2 minimal R&B hits. In the meantime, while trying to juggle her wavering career and taking care of Rick James's son, Rick Jr., a family friend's son named Jeremiah O'Neill, and for a while she took care of Lenny Kravitz. Teena became pregnant with her own child. On Christmas Day of 1991, Teena gave birth to her only biological daughter, Alea Rose, with mailman and college classmate Peter Butcher. During the 1990s, Teena Marie's was more so seen as a legacy act. Her classic R&B and funk records were either sampled by hip-hop artists or covered by R&B divas. Artists like the Fugees paid tribute to her by interpolating the chorus of her hit Ooh La 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 into their own hit Fuji La. Even though the mainstream public wasn't really checking for new music from her, Teena continued to release new projects. In the fall of 1994, she released her album Passion Play on her own independent label, Sarai Records. It didn't do well and sold next to nothing. With all of her projects basically flopping, subsequently, Teena Marie devoted most of her time to raising her daughter and caring for her family. By the late 1990s, she began working on a new project, one entitled Black Rain. She couldn't find a major label deal for the album and was afraid to put it out on her own Sarai label because of how poorly her previous albums sold. Bootlegs of her music were sold among fans and showed she was still somewhat valued. Still, she went on a 10-year hiatus, only making a few appearances here and there. She made TV appearances on episodes of New York Undercover as well as The Parkers. In 2004, after her 10-year hiatus from the music industry, Miss Teena Marie returned to the public when she signed with the successful hip-hop label Cash Money Records. She released 2 albums, La Doña, which became a gold-certified success and the highest-charting album of her career, peaking at number 6 on the Billboard 200 chart, and the follow-up album, Sapphire, in 2006. Both these albums did decently enough, but after the release of Sapphire, Teena Marie parted ways with Cash Money Records. Though throughout the years, Teena was staying afloat with performing at different venues and festivals, and even releasing new music here and there, life started to take a dark turn, and would seem to get darker. Several things happened to Teena that made her question her life and whether or not it was cursed until the inevitable happened. It all began 6 years before her death, in a hotel room where the first eerie omens struck. As Teena slept, a massive picture frame, seemingly out of nowhere, came crashing down onto her head. The impact was so brutal that it left her with a concussion that would mark the beginning of a downward spiral. In the same cursed room, a monstrous 7-foot-tall, 500-pound Sub-Zero refrigerator inexplicably toppled over on top of her, crushing her petite, barely 5-foot frame. It was almost as if something was trying to bury her alive. What was wrong with this room? Though she survived these incidents, she was left battered and forever changed because it left her having a lifetime full of seizures, violent, unrelenting, and growing more frequent. Then in the same year as her accidents came the loss of the man that truly found her. Rick James passed away on August 6, 2004, at the age of 56 due to heart failure with multiple substances found in his system. His death sent shockwaves through the music industry, especially affecting Teena. Despite their tumultuous past, Teena still held deep love and respect for Rick. When Teena learned he had passed, she was completely devastated. He had been one of the most significant figures in her life, her mentor, her lover, her creative partner, and her greatest heartbreak. Losing him sent her into a tailspin, and the grief weighed on her heavily. Already suffering from chronic pain due to her injuries, she turned to Vicodin to cope, just as Rick had turned to substances throughout his own troubled life. But the pain, both physical and emotional, never truly subsided. Her addiction to Vicodin had gone out of control and she had to get help for it, but she was still struggling with the seizures. In 2008, during her performance at the Essence Festival, she suffered a major seizure, collapsing in front of horrified fans. With all these things happening back to back is when Teena started to question what felt like the jinx in her life. But through it all, she still managed to release one last album in the process. It was called Congo Square. And it was during the interview promoting the album where she said, "For a while I thought I was cursed. I was in a lot of pain, and it's really amazing to me that even though that pain, I could write some really joyful music." This album was a little different from her other releases in that Teena admitted to tapping into the spirits and unseen energies to help her conjure up the sound she was looking for. In what would be her 13th and final album entitled Congo Square, Teena was inspired by the real-life place of spirits in the heart of New Orleans. The real-life Congo Square is a historic open space where slaves as well as free people of color gathered for meetings, open markets, and the African dance and drumming celebrations that played a huge role in the development of jazz. To this day, voodoo practitioners still consider Congo Square a spiritual base and gather there for rituals. This is what Teena did, and this album was infused with something deeper, something spiritual, maybe something otherworldly. And then you have the number 13, which has always carried an ominous weight in the realms of superstition and the occult. It's the number of transformation, the unknown, the bridge between life and death, but also considered unlucky. And for Teena Marie, her 13th album was unlike anything she had ever created before. She spoke of Congo Square as if it were alive, a mystical place where the souls of long-gone musicians still hum through the air. It was there in the echoes of West Indian drums and the lingering cries of enslaved souls who once danced in defiance that Teena found herself communing with the spirits of the past. She named them Louis Armstrong, John Lee Hooker, Curtis Mayfield, Marvin Gaye, Minnie Riperton, and even legends still alive, as if calling upon their energy in real time. To her, Congo Square wasn't just an album title, it was an address, an eternal resting place where all musicians would one day gather in the afterlife. The way she spoke about it was haunting, as if she had already begun her transition, as if she were preparing to join the spirits she had been summoning through her music. I thought it would be awesome if Congo Square would be the address of all the musicians that have ever come through, she said, as if she was writing her name onto that list before her time. And then, months later, she would soon be gone. But the most chilling episode occurred just 1 month before her death, a massive grand mal seizure that left her shaken and weakened. She was prescribed medication to manage it, but the side effects nearly drove her to the brink of self-deletion thoughts. Unwilling to continue on such a dangerous path, she reduced her dosage and turned to herbal medicine instead. Yet, the fear never left her. She became so afraid of what might happen in her sleep that she could no longer bear to sleep alone. Her daughter, Aaliyah Rose, often slept beside her, ensuring she made it through the night. On Christmas Day, Teena was surrounded by family as they were all celebrating Aaliyah Rose's 19th birthday. But something was off. Teena told her loved ones she wasn't feeling well and needed to rest. That night, one of her assistants slept beside her, watching over her as she had come to need. By morning, the assistant left, and Teena was awake, tweeting in the early hours, her last known message to the world sent out at 11:30 a.m. These were some of the tweets that she shared that morning. This was the last one that seemed like maybe she felt something dire was coming. At 1 p.m., Aaliyah Rose checked on her mother, finding her awake and seemingly fine. But just 2 hours later, when she went to check again, she found her unresponsive. A nearby individual called 911, but by the time paramedics arrived, it was already too late. The official cause of death was listed as natural causes, but the confusion remained. So many questions that need to be answered. Was it the years of trauma from multiple seizures, the addiction to Vicodin that dulled her pain but may have weakened her body, the dangerous balancing act of reducing her seizure medication, or was it something more? Was it a simple twist of fate, or had Teena unknowingly set something in motion? Had she tapped into forces beyond her understanding? Had the spirits of Congo Square been calling her home? Or was she right all along? Was she truly cursed? Obviously, we'll never truly be able to answer these questions, but what we do know for sure is that Teena Marie was a talent that brought joy to the world. Her unique singing and songwriting has inspired so many people, black and white, and she has always been respectful in showing her love and dedication to the black community and its art forms. And that's why Teena Marie is heralded as the Ivory Queen of Soul. So lurkers, what do you think? Do you think Teena tapping into the spiritual realm of Congo Square caused any of her issues? Were you aware of Teena's law? Did you know about any of these stories? Let me know down below.